To sew our pajama pants, the first thing that it says to do is stitch and serge the front and back at the inner leg seam. So we're going to stitch that with our machine, and then you need to put a seam finish on it. It recommends to serge that seam finish, but you can use any seam finish that you want to do. So what we're going to do then is we're going to take our pattern piece and we're going to lay the back pattern piece on the table, right side up. We are going to place the front pattern piece on top of that, right side down, matching the inside leg seam. So the inside leg seam is going to be our shorter leg seam with the curve that's in the middle of our crotch seam. So we're going to unpin our pattern pieces. So with our pattern, we can tell the inseam by we find the crotch seam and look for the curve. So this is the top of our pants. We're going to come down the curved seam, which is either your center front or center back, depending on your pattern piece. And this seam right here is going to be our inner leg seam. So we're going to get that for both of our pattern pieces, our front and our backs. So unpin your back pattern piece also. And remember, when we laid our fabric out, we laid right sides up. And we want right sides together with our pattern pieces, our fabric, as we are beginning to sew them. So I'm going to take my top piece because it's right side up, and I'm going to lay that on my table, right side up, with my inner leg seam here. Then I'm going to take the top of my front piece and I'm going to turn it so that it is right side down and that the inner seam legs match up. So I want to make sure that they match at the crotch. So I want them to match there. I also want them to match at the seam edge going all the way down. And then I'm going to pin that so that it'll be ready to sew. And as I'm pinning, because I have a plaid, I'm making sure that my horizontal stripes are matching up on both the front and the back so that when I sew it together, they'll continue around the body. Okay, we want to match our notches. Make sure that we have those correctly lined up. Okay, once you have the one leg pinned together, then we're going to do the same process to pin the other leg together. So we're going to take our back and we're going to lay it right side down. And then we're going to take our front. Our back is laid right side up. We're going to take our front, lay it right side down so that right sides are together. Again, lining up the crotch seam and the inner leg seam all the way down the seam. And then we will pin that. Okay, so to make sure that you have them laid correctly with right sides together, lay one piece out and then lay the other piece beside it, and they should be going in opposite directions. So if you lay it out and they both go the same direction, then you have one set with right sides together and one set with wrong sides together. So you want to make sure they go in opposite directions so that you have right sides together on both of your pattern pieces. The other thing is that your front and your back are not going to line up at the side, and that's okay. Right now all we're worried about is that the inner leg seam lines up because our back pieces are bigger than our front pieces. With our machine threaded with coordinating thread or matching thread, we're ready to sew the inseam of our pajama pants. Now when you're matching your thread will always appear to sew in lighter than the actual color of the thread. So if you don't have something that matches perfectly, go with a slightly darker shade of thread because it will appear lighter as you sew it in. So to sew our seam, we're going to line up the edge of our fabric with the 5/8 inch mark on our sewing machine, which is the standard size for a seam that we're going to sew. We're going to use a plain stitch, so we use a regular stitch length, and we're going to back stitch. So we're going to back stitch to the edge, then we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. When we get to the edge, we're going to back stitch again to secure our seam. And we're going to do that for both of our pants legs, so the left and the right pants leg. So we're going to go ahead and do the other pants leg while we're sewing. Back stitch and sew at 5/8 of an inch. and you get to the end back stitch. So we've sewn our inseams. Now we need to put a seam finish on each of those seams so that they do not ravel. So I am going to serge my seam finish with a serger. A serger is a machine that uses a upper and lower thread and creates an overlocking loop on the fabric as you stitch with that. This is the stitch that is a seam finish that is used most often in the industry. And you have to be careful as you are creating a serge because it actually cuts the edge of the fabric off as you are sewing to create the size of seam allowance that it needs to create the over edge stitch. If you don't have a serger, you can use any of the other seam finishes that we have learned. So I'm going to do that for both pant legs. And with a serger, you do not back stitch. Step 2 says, with right sides together, pin center seam, which is your crotch seam, matching inner leg seams and notches. Stitch and serge. For conventional machine, to reinforce the seam, stitch again over the first stitching, trim the seam curve to 1/4 of an inch, press remaining seam open. So what we are going to do is, this is our fronts and this is our backs. So we're going to match backs to backs, fronts to fronts, lining up the inner seam. So I have my fabric, my pattern pieces, laying right side up. This is my front and this is my back. And there's two ways that I know which is the front and the back. So as you look at your crotch seam or your center seam, your front seam from your end leg up will be a smaller curve. Your back will be a larger curve. The other way I know is that I have a double notch on my front and I have a triple notch on my back. So I have these right side up. My inseam for my leg, I have the seam allowance actually facing to the back. So if you do a seam finish that finishes your seam allowances together to where you can't open them flat, then you always push your seam allowances to the back. If you do a seam finish that allows you to open your seam allowances so that they lay flat, then you push one to the back and one to the front. Okay, so I have my pattern pieces facing right side up. Now I'm going to take my other side of my pajama pants and I'm going to place them right side down, matching that seam with fronts together, coming up, and back pieces together. So I should have my triple notches matching on my back, my double notches matching on my front, and I should have my inner leg seam matching as well. So I'm going to pin those in place so that all of those are matching. And I want to line up the edge of my crotch seam so that the edge of the seam matches as well. So I have that pinned and ready to sew. To sew the crotch or the center seam, we're going to line the edge up at 5/8 of an inch. We're going to use a regular stitch length. We're going to back stitch. And then we're going to stitch following the edge of the fabric. I'm going to stitch down the back. And then as you get to the bottom of the seam or the inner part of the seam, you're going to slightly turn the fabric as you're sewing to continue to follow the edge of the fabric, keeping it at 5/8 of an inch. When you get to the center seam, you're going to want to make sure that your seam allowances are in the correct direction. So mine are stitched together so they are facing the back. If they could open, I would have one to the front and one to the back. You want to make sure that they're doing that on both sides. When you get to the end, again, back stitch. So we've sewn the crotch seam or the center seam. You need to have finished that seam allowance as well. Then once you do that, then step 3 is you're ready to stitch the front to the back at the side seams. So this time we're going to line up our side seams front and back so that we can stitch those. So we have our center seam sewn. You should have it finished with the seam allowance. Now we're ready to lay it so that we can match up the side seams. So I'm taking the back and I'm going to lay my pajama pants so that I have the back here. Here's my center back seam, right side up, and then I have all my fabric right here. So I'm going to spread it out with the right side up until I find the top of the center front. Okay, so with that, then I'm going to bring that up. So now that the center front is wrong side up, so I have my seam here, and I am going to match the top of the pajama pants, the side seam, and this is the waist of the back and the front. I have a center back seam here, center front seam here, center back seam here. That was that crotch seam that we just sewed, and I have the other side right here at the top. So then I'm going to take that, and I should have, at that point, I should have front to back with the side seams so that I can match those up. So I can match my notches. So I have a single notch that I'm going to match. I'm going to match the waist. I'm going to line the side seam up so that the fabric edges match, and then the bottom should match as well when I get to the hem, and I'm going to pin that. So I've pinned that side. Now I'm going back up to the top, grabbing the other side and doing the same thing. Gonna match that side seam. Gonna match my notches. So I have that. Both side seams are now pinned to sew. To sew the side seams, we're going to line up the edge of our fabric with 5/8 of an inch. We're going to use a regular stitch length and we're going to back stitch. And then we're going to stitch down the seam. Get to the edge, we'll back stitch. And we'll do that for both side seams. 5/8 of an inch, back stitch. Stitch all the way down. Then when you get to the end, back stitch.